going to go over understanding the strengths and limitations of the National Directory of New Hires data today. Next slide. So my name is Gilda Surdia and I'm from MDRC. I'm also joined by my colleagues Johanna Walter, Edith Yang, and Katya Golkin. Um, I'm also joined by our colleagues at MEF Associates who are leading the Total project, Donna Pavetti and Sofia Torres. And none of this would be possible without the support of our federal partners at the Office of Family Assistance and at OPRE. Next slide. So we're really excited about today's agenda. We're first going to describe the National Directory of New Hires data, which is being used to create some the outcome measures from your Exeter's report. And we'll also discuss the strengths and limitations of the NDNH data. And most of the session will be focused on some updates from OFA on the work outcomes calculations. And at the end, we'll have some time for you to ask any questions. And I'm going to pass the mic over to Johanna Walter.
Thanks. As Gilda mentioned, I'm going to talk about the National Directory of New Hires, and we'll have a little time for questions at the end, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat as you think of them. It'll be nice to have a list, and also it could be helpful if we run out of time. Next slide, please. So why am I talking about the NDNH? How is it relevant to the work outcomes reporting you've been doing? As you all know, the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023 included new reporting requirements for TANF agencies. And for the work outcomes report, every quarter, states and territories are required to report the Social Security numbers for all work eligible individuals who exit TANF. And then these SSNs are matched to the quarterly wage data in the National Directory of New Hires. And the data compiled from the NDNH are used to calculate 3 work outcome measures that you'll hear more about in the second part of this session. Next slide, please. So what is the National Directory of New Hires? As it says here, the NDNH is a database of individual level employment and earnings information from all states and federal agencies that is maintained by the Office of Child Support Enforcement. It was established as part of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996 to assist states in locating parents that may live or work out of state to facilitate enforcement of child support, such as setting up withholding orders. Congress also authorized specific state and federal agencies to receive information from the NDNH for other purposes, for example, research or verifying employment and income for certain programs. However, there is a fairly lengthy application and approval process for that. Next slide, please. Even though it's called the National Directory of New Hires, it includes 3 types of data. Starting on the left, quarterly wage. These are the quarterly earnings amounts employers report for each employee to their state agency for unemployment insurance purposes. Federal agencies also report earnings data to the NDNH. New hires. This information typically comes from the IRS W-4 forms that a newly hired person completes when they start a job. That's the form you complete so that your employer withholds the right amount of money from your paycheck for taxes. And unemployment insurance. This is information on applicants and recipients of unemployment benefits. So why these 3 types of information? Remember that the NDNH was established for child support purposes, and the child support agencies can use the information on whether and where someone is working that they can get from the quarterly wage and new hires data to try to set up income withholding orders. And UI benefits information is included because child support payments can be withheld from unemployment insurance benefits. As you can imagine, given that the system houses sensitive information about all workers, there are a lot of protections built into the use of these data. For example, I mentioned the application and approval process to gain access to the data. Also, the data are retained in the NDNH for only 24 months from the time they are entered into it. They must be deleted after that time. Next slide, please. What is the source of the data in the NDNH? As shown in the flow chart, quarterly wages. Employers report their employees' quarterly earnings to their state workforce agency, and then state workforce agencies and federal agencies report the information to the NDNH. For the new hires data, employers report new hires information to their state directory of new hires, and those state agencies submit the information to the NDNH. Federal agencies report this information directly to the NDNH. For unemployment insurance, state workforce agencies report the UI information to the NDNH. As you may recall, I mentioned earlier that for the work outcomes measures, ACF uses the quarterly wage data. So I'll be focusing mostly on those, but I wanted to note the three types of data in the NDNH for awareness, and also to illustrate that the data reflect the sources of the reported data. For example, because the main source of the quarterly wage data is earnings reported for determining unemployment insurance benefits, that's mainly jobs covered by UI. And the new hires data generally come from the W-4 forms that people complete when they are hired as an employee, but that doesn't include self-employment and may also exclude contract or gig work since the person is not an employee in those cases. Some states have started to require new hires information to be reported for some, but not all contract work. And it's not clear what compliance or enforcement looks like. But even if the new hires information is reported for a contract job, the earnings from that would still not be captured in the quarterly wage data. And although this arrangement isn't perfect for anyone wanting to use the NDNH data to get a complete picture of an individual's earnings, it is suitable for child support purposes. Next slide, please. That was a quick rundown of a lot of background information. Now I'm going to summarize, given all that, what are the strengths and limitations of this data source? Next slide, please. These are some of the benefits of the NDNH. It brings together in one place a number of different employment-related data sources from all states and from federal agencies. Because it is a national data source, it's helpful to states for getting employment information, even if somebody has moved out of state or someone works across state lines. And it offers pretty comprehensive coverage, even though the quarterly wage data do not capture all forms of work. According to a Bureau of Labor Statistics report, approximately 97% of non-farm employment was UI covered in 2021. Next slide, please. And on the flip side, here's some limitations of this data source. The process for getting access to the data can be a bit of an undertaking if your agency hasn't already negotiated an agreement. And SSNs are necessary for matching to the NDNH. For example, if an SSN is not reported for an exeter, then the NDNH can't provide employment and earnings information for them. And as I've mentioned before, the NDNH quarterly wage data doesn't provide 100% coverage of earnings from all work. Next slide, please. Some additional limitations. The quarterly wage data may not be complete in the NDNH for up to 12 months following the end of a quarter. These data lags are due in part to the quarterly nature of the data. That is, employers don't know the amount until the quarter ends, but also timeliness of reporting to the NDNH is a factor. Even though there are reporting deadlines, because it flows through a number of hands, there can be delays. And because the data are retained in the NDNH for only 24 months from the time they are entered into it, it's a moving target. You have to make sure you capture it while it is available. So for example, if today I needed to know what someone earned 3 years ago, that information would no longer be available from the NDNH. Next slide, please. Thank you. That's all I have on the NDNH, but we have a few minutes for questions. You can unmute and ask your questions or put that in the chat. I'll give another couple of seconds if you want to think. Oh, will the slides be shared with the participants? Yes, the slides will be shared. Typically after these sessions, they are prepared and then posted on the total website. So look for them there. I think We'll send out a message when the slides are available. Okay, and another question here is, do all users that have access to the NDNH go through a security training for NDNH data? There are security limitations that are written into the agreements that you would negotiate for access to the data. So that information, yes, is provided. And yes, we will be sharing a link to the slides when they become available. Well, I know you all are anxious about the next part of this presentation. And so I am going to turn you over to Kathleen. But if you do find that you have additional questions that you think of later on, please email them to tanfdata@acf.hhs.gov, or you can bring them to our drop-in office hours. The next ones are scheduled for May 11th and May 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern. So without further ado, I'm going to turn you over to Kathleen Moore from ACF, who's going to tell you about the work outcomes measures that are produced using the quarterly wage data.
Great, thank you. Let me share my slides here. Can folks see slides?
No.
That's very helpful. And try again. How about now?
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful, thank you. I'm Kathleen Moore. I am at OFA and I have been working with the FRA data. And today we've just learned about some of the NDNH caveats and limitations, and we're going to see how this translates into FRA measures and reports that we're going to begin sharing with you all. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we calculate the FRA work outcome measures, the mechanics, the components of those measures. And then we're going to look at how NDNH limitations show up in the data, and you'll really see this in action. We'll talk about how to interpret provisional results. Everything I show you today is really early, and these measures we're going to be looking at them again and again for a long time before they're finalized. So just remember, this is just a first look at very, very fresh data. And then we'll talk about what your reports will look like. Okay, how we calculate measures. For these measures, it's always going to be important to think about the NDNH completeness. And we're going to provide that on a quarter by quarter basis. So there is not a single definition of when NDNH data is complete. What we've done here is looked at all the records in our match over time and see how they're accumulating. And if a quarter seems like really low given the past, we call it incomplete. And if we don't have any records at all, we call it not yet available. So what is on the slide today is the national data set, and that's across state submitters and federal submitters. And it's for a broader set of records than just the FRA. So just keep in mind, it's all the things we receive on our match, but it is provided as a helpful context to understand some of the numbers you're seeing, some of the missingness you might see across the measures. Always in the background, like, what quarter does this measure rely on? And given where we are, should we think it's complete or incomplete? We've got NDNH completeness. We've also got FRA Exeter completeness. And like, y'all are doing like a really good job on that. And I'm very, very grateful. You see here that there are just a handful of error reports, and there's just a few instances where data hasn't been submitted. Our strategy is to match early and often with the NDNH. So as soon as you can get those later reports in, the better. Another match file is going to be prepped first week of June. So if you got some of those straggler reports or errors you've been thinking about addressing, it would be really great to get those in by the May 31st if possible. But always keep, we have the NDNH completeness, and in the back of your mind, always think about where are we with our FRA report submissions. Like, we haven't submitted Q4 yet. We're not going to receive results for that. We've said it before. We will say it again, and it is just something that it's an evergreen feature of the NDNH data. It's slow. It is slow. It's about 9 to 12 months, give or take. It's moving pretty slow at the moment. Submission rates vary by states. The national level might look okay, but when you drill down to like a particular state, maybe that state is having some delay in their NDNH submissions. And just like our TANF data can be delayed for technical reasons, unexpected leave, like all these kinds of things, the same things can happen over at state wage agencies with their NDNH records. But all this means, right, at this point, everything is provisional and they can change. They can change due to NDNH lags, to FRA lags, and then also any issues in transmission and processing at ACF could also lead to change. So just always keep that in mind as you start to look at these measures over time. Okay, how unmatched individuals are treated is important to understand. And when we say unmatched, we mean we take all your SSNs that are not placeholder SSNs on your exit reports, and we ask the NDNH, do you have wage records on any of these folks, right? And they return us back SSNs that matched, wage records that matched. So in these measures, we treat folks that do not match, SSNs that do not match, as unemployed and with $0 earnings for the quarter. In reality, right, that not matching can mean different things, and we won't ever know 100% the truth, right? We'll never know true employment here, right? So the individual could really have no employment earnings for that quarter. The individual could be employed in a job that didn't get captured by NDNH systematically. The individual's SSN could have been invalid. Maybe it's not actually their real SSN for some reason, or the numbers are transposed or something. So that's another source of reasons someone might be matched. So all these employment measures kind of set like a floor for employment, right? And true employment is likely somewhere above that. One last definition before we look at actual things. We define unique exiters in a particular way, and it involves excluding certain kinds of records from your exit report. So we pull out placeholder SSN records, but we will report those counts to you. They're allowed in TDP, but they can't match to the NDNH. And while you're allowed to submit them, I would ask you to consider like the role they're playing in your reporting. And if you think they might be able to really match to the NDNH, you might think about replacing some of those over time. So placeholder SSNs, net it out. Duplicate SSN records within the same month. This only happens once actually in all the reporting year. or within the same quarter. So current rules allow an exit at the very start of the quarter or a very end of a quarter. And just for measure calculations, we just take the latest exit in that instance. And then the last set of records we take out is adjacent month exiters. And we'll talk a little bit more detailed about that. So those are individuals exiting in consecutive months. So for example, somebody shows up on the exit report December 2025, and then they show up in the next quarter in January 2026. We treat those as adjacent month exits that violate the 90-day thresholds clearly. And so we just take the latest exit in sequences like that. So in your submissions feedback report, you have that adjacent SSN field that is that is talking about that within a quarter. But this is something you might want to think about in your own reporting, like why are these adjacent months appearing? But for today's measures, we're going to just focus on their latest exit. So placeholder SSNs, duplicate within month, duplicate within quarter, and adjacent months SSNs. Those folks get pulled out of the measure, and those records get pulled out of the measure. Okay. So the very first FRA measure is looking at that second quarter after exit employment rate. So we have this chart here, and each bar represents a reporting quarter. So looking at the first one in 2025, Q1, of those total unique exiters for that reporting quarter, about 47% of them have employment 2 quarters after exit. Jumping down to look at the icons under the axis, that is those completeness assessments. So those are there as a visual guide to kind of help you determine like how complete is this measure for this quarter, do we think? And we see that for the national set, the first 2 reporting quarters we feel pretty good about, and then you can see those NDNH lags pretty directly. In the remaining 2 reporting quarters, the bars get lower, or in some instances, the bars are missing. So just to reiterate how we calculate this measure, we look at those total unique exiters in a reporting quarter, netted out all these extra records, and then we look 2 quarters in the future and see who has earnings in the NDNH. And that is the numerator for this measure. And then the next measure, also based on this exit to Q2 arrangement, is median earnings second quarter after exit. So the median earnings of exiters who are in unsubsidized employment during the second quarter after exit. Here we have the same setup of the reporting quarter bars. And we can see that for reporting quarter 1, that the median was about $6,700. You'll note here, like these bars are pretty much the same height, even in a quarter that's incomplete, that if we look at 2025 Q3. And just remember that like medians, you can calculate a median with 1 record. So medians can sometimes look like they've got great coverage, right? But when you drill down, there might not be as many records there. So just always keep that in mind with the median. And how we calculate it, again, we've got those exiters that were employed in Q2. Among them only, what is the median of the earnings? So there's no $0 values in these earnings, it's just folks that had earnings. And then the last measure, the employment retention rate, fourth quarter after exit, the percentage of exiters who are employed in Q2 after exit who are also employed in Q4 after exit. Now, this measure depends on coverage in 2 quarters. So that will get complex. You have to have good coverage and wage records in Q2 and then also in Q4. And we see from the little icons here, we've got red warning icons all the way through. So like we can calculate it, but we maybe shouldn't pay attention to it for a while. So we see in 2025 Q1, the retention rate is about 57%. And just how we calculate it with those folks that were employed in Q2, looking at Q4, how many were employed. And take note that what happened in Q3 doesn't matter the way the measure was in statute. It doesn't care. It really only cares about Q2 and Q4. We add some additional employment measures just because we think they're useful and we have the data. And so we show employment rates at quarter of exit and first, second, third quarter after exit. These are not, they're not official measures. They really are just another way to look at these data. So here for these charts, they're a little different than the ones we looked at for the FRA measures. It is just for one reporting quarter. And you'll see the labels are quarter of exit, first, second, third after exit. Here we see, we feel like we have good coverage of all these quarters and the rates are fairly stable. And these are calculated with the same denominator each time. So just looking at that exit cohort, who's employed, quarter of exit, first quarter after exit, and so on. So they're a little different, but you'll have those for each reporting quarter. Okay, your reports. So you'll soon begin receiving reports that will be specific to your jurisdiction. So the completeness will talk about the records from your jurisdiction, the measures, and so on. They'll be available roughly each quarter through the TDP feedback feature. And each report will include the most up-to-date NDNH data we have. We match quarterly at the moment. Looking at these reports is entirely optional. You don't have to if you really don't want to, but it is recommended. It's just another way that we can surface issues with data. So if you have the time, like I would really appreciate it. OFA will not be releasing these provisional reports beyond TDP. So you decide if and how these reports are distributed beyond that. I will say, just like for all transparency, these reports will be shared with the total team, our wonderful total team here that is working on planning and delivering technical assistance to y'all. And then also the FRA pilot states will be released to the evaluation team working with them. But beyond that, it's really just for y'all. It's not meant for wide distribution. Oh, and so these reports are not available today. I believe I am shooting for them to be available May 15th at the latest. And why the delay? The delay is honestly because I want to check things one last time before I release them to you all. So like I really appreciate your patience here. Reports have 2 main sections, one with the results some tables and the charts that we kind of looked at today will be there. And then notes will have technical details about data sources, processing, and calculations. That's for your reference. And if you need help communicating these measures to other stakeholders, maybe take a look there. For each measure, it includes the chart, the visual display, the definitions behind it, the table of the component measures that go into it, and then a little bit of interpretation. The report, which we will look at, has a dynamic table of contents. You can save the images as charts. And it's a standalone HTML that doesn't require connection to the internet to share. Okay, how to read your report. So again, like NDNH is not complete. These results are provisional. Those green check marks, red warning symbols, and gray boxes are there to kind of help guide you visually while you think about that completeness in your jurisdiction. So just like green check marks, like they're more reliable values. They can still change. Like the NDNH data can still change for them. But those are probably in a place where you could start comparing across quarters. Red warning symbol, like don't like those values will change. Like don't draw conclusions yet. And gray boxes, there's nothing to see yet. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these things. And again, understanding missing low or zero values. Please don't panic about low numbers. This is so early. We're so early in this process. And the low numbers, zero numbers reflect incomplete NDNH data, not poor performance. Like these values are going to change. They're likely going to increase. So really look at those warning indicators. Missing values in particular indicate that we just can't calculate it yet. So there could be delays with NDNH and or FRA data. And in charts, like no bar is shown, no annotation on that bar. And then in tables, you'll see NA. How you access these feedback reports is through TDP. So if you are not a user of TDP, but you want to access these reports, like go through these steps to request access. If you're an existing user and you don't have access to the FRA components, you request this access through the profile. And if you have any problems with that, please email us at that TANF data email. There's also some information in the TDP Knowledge Center. And then this is just a screenshot showing where the feedback tab is in TDP. Okay. With that, we're going to look at the report really quick. We're going to look at a national report. And I would appreciate it if someone could come off mic and tell me, can you see the report and is it big enough?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, over here is the table of contents we were talking about. You can click on it to navigate to different sections. There's a little bit of an overview. There's our wage completeness table. There's some quarterly count information, placeholder counts, and report submission date here is for this report, the version of your exit report that we're using, which may or may not be the most up-to-date given at TDP. The way NDNH matching works, we have to, at a certain point, send FRA information to them. And so you'll see throughout extract dates, and that's just trying to keep all that metadata, that information about the data we're using straight. When we look at a measure, you'll see here is a chart like very similar. to what we were looking at, definitions and data, and that table with the components specific for that measure is under there. And then a little bit of notes on interpretation of a measure. The additional measures are there, like we looked at. And then some notes that are really just documentation primarily on the NDNH and why these measures change over time. And just some other data handling things. So you'll receive a report like this. It will be specific to your jurisdiction. And that report will be available in TDP by May 15th. Okay. Oh, and now it's time for questions. Yeah. So I guess you could come off mute or use the chat. And I'm gonna stop sharing.
There are a number in the chat that were added as you were talking. But we can help curate that.
Kathleen, there was one question about how the retention measure is being created. You're looking at 2 quarters, whether individuals are employed in 2 quarters, regardless of whether they are with the same employer, correct?
Yes, so it is any employment. It is not looking at those pseudo employer IDs to see if it is a stable job.
Great.
There's questions about the definition of exeter, and pointing to technical resources. Is there any more questions about the exeter definition?
I just wanted to say, this is Rosemary from Arizona, IT systems. So in going backwards and looking at some of our data, like I started kind of running these measures myself, and I realized that if you're looking at an exeter, since we're comparing it to quarterly data, you have to kind of go back and set that baseline date of exit first, and you have to look at it on a month by month basis first. So it took me a good 3 hours, I think, to just finally break it down and realize each month get your baseline. And then that way, when you're going forward, you know that you can look for whether they came back in the next 3 months or not. And then at the end of that quarter, then you can get the unique SSNs to then match back. And it gives you a way, it gave me some eye opening, like, somebody was at the beginning of the quarter employed or closed, and then they came back, the fourth quarter or the fourth month after. So then you get the two, but because of the way they measure it out, second quarter after exit and fourth quarter after exit, it actually falls not as side by side, or what, I don't remember what word to use for the quarters, but subsequent quarters, it actually skipped a quarter in between. So that is important to know, because you do have to count that as part of that median number that you're going to get.
Yeah, those FRA measured definitions are like set in statute, right?
Yeah.
And so those can't change, but like we can look at data in different ways if folks are interested. If enough folks are interested, we can provide additional measures.
There is another question in the chat about self-employment, whether that's included in the measures.
Yeah, self-employment is not systematically captured by the NDNH. So like if that's like a significant source of earnings for your exiters, you might think about submitting the supplemental measure, which Total will run additional sessions on in the future, but basically that's where you use your own wage data or survey data to come up with measures for your exiters.
Yes, as Kathleen said, we'll have another session to describe this supplement. It's a optional supplemental report that you can create, where you can create these measures on your own and submit them.
There was a question earlier also, maybe more of a comment about the median earnings value looking low from a living wage point of view, but I just wanted to comment on the fact that, like, because these are quarterly data, it's hard to know if those earnings that are reported for that quarter could be that somebody started that job at the end of the quarter, or maybe they had worked 1 month at the beginning of the quarter and then were no longer working that. So, it's an earnings amount that's denominated in quarterly amounts. So it's kind of a gross measure, I suppose. Kathleen, you might have more to say about.
Yeah, they're called wage records, but really remembering that they are earnings records, and we don't have that level of detail to know like how much they were working. And yeah, so it does get complicated, but these values are across a quarter. If it's only $6,000, that's not a lot,
Are there any other questions? You can always feel free to email. Like if you think of something, you can always email later. Can we go back to the presentation, Sophia? Thank you. So I just wanted to let you know about upcoming events. So, we've been holding drop-in office hours, and it's been great to see some of the states join the office hours. These are informal sessions. You can stop by to ask any questions about your data acquisition efforts. You can stop by to talk about the reports once you receive them, and we can go over the results. We can help you interpret them, or if you still have any questions, you can, just join us. The next drop-in office hours will be May 11th from 3 to 4 Eastern Time, and Friday, May 15th from 3 to 4. And Sophia just dropped the registration link on the chat. So feel free to register and join us in May. And we're also very excited to let you know that we're going to be at the REX conference. We're going to have a session on the FRA secondary education outcomes reporting. And that session will be on Thursday, May 21st. It's going to be during lunch. So I hope you join us for that. And we'll also have another working group session on administrative records on Wednesday, June 17th from 2 to 3 Eastern Time. So mark your calendars and spread the word, and hope you can join us for these events. And here are additional guidance on the FRA reporting requirements. We're also providing a guide to the National Directory of New Hires and other technical resources. And again, if you have any questions or you want one-on-one TA, please email the TANF data at acf.hhs.gov email, and we'll get back to you. Mm. Right. There's a question in the chat. Is there any chance the Rex conference session will be streamed? That's a good question. I'm not sure if that's possible. We'll have to find out and let you know.
It may not be as helpful streamed, because I do think that we're planning a lot of like interactive discussion. So I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I think we can thought about it, but we'll think about it internally and let you know. Is everyone, uh, I guess it would be interesting to know how many people are planning to attend Rex. If you're planning to attend Rex, do you want to put in the chat whether you're planning to attend? Yes. Great. That's wonderful. Wow. It's great to see lots of people attending Rex. It's great. Alaska will be there, Maryland. Right, we're very excited to see some of you in person from Hawaii. Great. Yeah, less than a month away, so very exciting. All right, so I hope I'm not sure. Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. All right. Yeah, so watch for an email from us which will provide more details about the office hours, the rec session, and we'll be in touch and hope to see you in the next office hour. All right. Thank you everyone for joining.